Good evening. It's Wednesday, January 10th, 2024, 11 p.m. You're watching Co-op for Two. Today we're in an unusual position. We have just finished playing The Hidden Listener, a 12-box game from CosyKiller. We finished box 12 last night, played for about 4.5 hours. And had a pretty unpleasant experience with the last box. Fairly unanimously, we were not happy. The plan was, after playing through the last box, to talk about the game, to talk at length about it. But it was decided that our emotions were still a little raw from the experience, and maybe we would be better off sleeping on our thoughts, trying to come back in a more constructive fashion and talk about the game. I appreciate everyone who's showed up today. YouTube says there are 14 viewers. That's probably a little bit more than one could rightfully expect for what's going to be just a chat between you and I, to try to hash through our thoughts about this game. Now, I will be posting a spoiler-free review of the game soon, but I'm still trying to figure out what I think about it. So let me talk about what I'd like to do today. This is going to be a much more informal thing than normal. I don't really have too much planned out here. But I would like us to sort of review our thoughts on the game, be honest. I know there's a little bit of a variety, but you know how these things work. There's always a groupthink that happens, and if everyone starts having a bad time, then it can kind of snowball. And there were some interesting comments on the Discord about how maybe there was too much negativity around our playthrough here, that we sort of got into a rut of being negative, and then we were all negative, and maybe it was distracting some of the enjoyment of the highlights of the game. And I think there may be something to that. And so before we get into this, and I want to hear your thoughts, one of the things, another thing that came up in the Discord is, and Tina was saying, why did you guys keep playing it if you weren't having a good time? And a related question is, why are you all here to discuss this with me? And I think there are a couple answers. One is that you and we're sort of got an unpaid job here. We're not getting paid for this, but it's kind of our responsibility to play these games, to enjoy them, but also to critique them. And you and I are in the same boat. No one's paying us for this. I bought this game myself, but for some reason we've taken it upon ourselves to give some thoughts for posterity, for people considering buying these games in the future. I'm not sure exactly what the arrangement is, but that's part of what we've agreed to do. And in order to talk about it, you have to play it through. And the other part of it is that we're trying to learn how to talk about games and learn how to be constructive in our criticism. And I do want us to remember that. Let's remember there are designers behind this, human beings who wrote this game, who spent huge amounts of time working on it. These are our subjective opinions. They're not the word of God. Just because we didn't like something doesn't mean someone else isn't going to like it. Everything we say is going to be caveated with, this is my subjective opinion. You may not agree. We are going to try to escape this whole situation that YouTube and board games are in, where all of the incentives are to lavish praise on everything. It's not helpful. So we're going to be honest and critique it, but we're going to try to do so from a constructive, not mean standpoint, and think of it as lessons for the next box. The company that makes the Hidden Listener, Cozy Killer, has made 5 games, and they're making more. They've got one that just kickstarted. So as hard as it may be to hear our opinions, some of our negative opinions here, think of it as tough love. It may be useful for them in developing their current box and getting better. Maybe they'll say, hey, I can dismiss that. That's not important. But maybe there are things to learn from our bad experiences. And we've got 40 hours of gameplay. They can go and see where the problems happened. Mystery games are very hard to play test. So you might imagine this box, this set may have been created and the designers never seen someone play through the whole thing. Only heard back from a couple playtesters, so maybe we can serve some use there. Okay, let me check in with the chat, see who's here. Why don't we... Anna says, first I have to say it was great playing with you. There were highs and lows. Even the lows were interesting talking about it with you, so no regrets in that regard. Well, I appreciate that. I mean, I feel the same way about this group. I enjoy playing the games with this group, and I enjoy talking about these things with this group. Okay, so before we start talking, I do want to show you the solution to the postcard grill from box 10. Nicola on the channel is really good at these puzzles, and he figured out how the grill was supposed to work. So let me remind you, show you the solution, talk a little bit about the hint system on the CosyKiller's site. Okay, so let's just zoom in a little bit here. Okay, so here was our grill. We had a clue, included a newspaper article you might like, weather appalling right now. Okay, so we knew right away, this is a grill that you're going to apply to this newspaper somewhere to get a message. We see this word spring is circled. So we tried to make a grill that puts spring right in here. Now we got a weird message here. It says C-U-A-L-G-E. And ironically, unfortunately, that was a bizarre coincidence because the letters UAL were on one of the cogs and GE was on another. It looked like they were telling us exactly how to mesh them. In the end, when we got to the final box, we realized that doesn't quite make sense because we got a different way to mesh them. Okay, so here is the solution that Nicola found. Not to put it here, but to go down to the last line and put it, let's see, I think, if I can even reconstruct it here. I need to bring up my other thing. You can see how hard how difficult this was. Let's see, is Nicola in the chat? It was, we need our notes in order to do this. In order to even remember how to solve this. Flip it upside down. Okay, maybe that was it. Flip it upside down. Okay. So, yeah, that was it. Yes. Okay, so flip it upside down, move it, indent it until you get to there. Okay. So, is it left aligned? I guess it is left aligned. Okay. So what does it say? Let's zoom in here so you can actually see it. It's not easy, but this is, should this be over this? Like this? It's very delicate. Maybe it's like this. Okay, so what is it saying? I gotta bring up the list of suspects and it'll make sense. Okay, so there's our list of suspects. Now look at number 7, Stefan Wines. Remember, this is someone we sort of got their name near the end. We've never met this person, never seen this person. But this postcard and grill is meant to say that that there, that SWEINS in clear. So this postcard grill was supposed to tell us that the person SWEINS is in the clear. And who is SWEINS? That is Stefan Wines. So that was the solution to the postcard grill. Professor B says, there's no way in a million years I would have figured that out. I mean, it's problematic because it involves not trying to match up with this, which matched up perfectly, flipping it upside down, scanning it everywhere. You'd have to scan it everywhere. There'd be no way you could prefer one location over another if you're not using this circle to line up. Scan it everywhere. But I think the really tricky part is, remember, you have no idea what this message is going to be about. But the really tricky part was the fact that we don't know this name. We've barely ever seen it. It's not a person we know. And then reconstructing the name, like even if you paused it on here and read it, you'd be like, this makes no sense. SWEI, you'd say, nope, it's nothing. You'd have to somehow have in your mind that you are looking for Stephen Wines. So, yeah, I think I would put this in the category of an unreasonable puzzle. But there you go. Okay. There is a hint page. At the end of yesterday's stream, we were talking about, is there a hint page or anything? Where are the solutions? Where does something that walks us through everything? There is a hint site on Cozy Killer. There are hints for the hidden listener. They are very incomplete. They give you nudges for each little mystery puzzle cipher, but they don't have the solutions, and some of the nudges and hints are very ambiguous. I would rank that near the bottom in quality for hint systems that we've seen. Okay. Let's try to talk about the hidden listener now and be constructive. So let's spend a little bit of time talking about what worked, what was good. Petiole says, regarding negativity, one of my theories of enjoyment is that there's a threshold factor. There's some threshold where enjoyment leaps and dips suddenly. I have found that, let's continue reading. Petiole says, above the enjoyment threshold, even if you have mixed feelings and some specific criticism, you'll have at worst a mediocre time. Below the enjoyment threshold, every irritation becomes more proof that the media sucks and has very little to redeem it. I think that's absolutely true. I would phrase it a little bit differently. I would say there is a feedback cycle that happens at a certain, but Petiole's right. There is a threshold. At a certain point, you switch and you become angry at the game, and then you start seeing all the flaws. Everything, every small thing starts to bug you, and you have very little patience left. Sometimes we talk about this in terms of losing faith in the designer. And at some point, if you lose faith in the game, in the designer, then you're on a very short fuse and you don't give any benefit of the doubt to anything. And it really triggers you into sort of a negative cycle, a snowball of negativity. And in the same sense, if a designer has earned lots of goodwill, you're willing to overlook things. And when you have a problem, you don't assume it's a bug. You assume you're not understanding something. So it's absolutely true. And somewhere towards the end of this game, we flipped. We absolutely flipped, lost faith, and our willingness to tolerate imperfections disappeared. So I absolutely do think that there's an element of that. All right. But let's try to cast our mind back to when we first started this game. So 12 boxes. I thought maybe we'll just go through the boxes a little bit and talk about them as we do it. And we're going to think of this as giving our playtesting report to Cozy Killer. Let's say they paid us a good amount of money. Let's pretend to give them suggestions for the next game. We're all experienced playtesters here. You'd have to pay us a lot to playtest the game properly before it was released, but okay. I liked the setup. The setup sort of wasn't just, hey, here's this old story. It was, you're related to this person. And that created a little bit of mystery. Like, oh, okay, how are we going to be tied in with this? Is there going to be some current day relative that we're going to interact with? And they phrased it as a little bit of a mystery. Like they said, here are these archives that are being declassified, and there's some discrepancies. Can you help with that? I liked that setup. I found that very compelling. Okay, and then we got this first box, which was quite small, and I understand that in one of the other series, there starts out with a big long diary. I think this was a good choice. There was some German in the letters. We knew right away, okay, this is going to require some internet work to translate it. And then we found our discrepancy, which is pretty cool because it was a discrepancy that almost like how you would open a cold case. We've got our death certificate, and then we've got a postcard that was sent afterwards, so we know she's still alive. Great setup for a mystery. They thought she was dead in history, but she's not. Where is this going to go? And then we got this big big newspaper from 1943, sort of setting the stage for the war. Now, it turns out we weren't sure, should we be reading everything looking for clues like we do in many newspaper games? But really, it was a real reproduction newspaper. So we didn't end up searching through every personal, which is good. But this is about as large a newspaper as we've ever seen in a game. It is a real newspaper, but it was fascinating to read about the war and real detailed articles about the strategies of the war and blowing up these dams. It was pretty cool. Now, one pattern that you're going to see carry through our entire experience with this game, though, is that we took very seriously this paper. We made notes on the dams that were attacked, since that seems like what this paper is mostly about. Them attacking these bombs and a couple of the people mentioned. None of that was important, really. It was just real history of real going on, but there was really nothing in the paper that we had to make note of that was significant, really. There is a story about POWs coming in that comes back to us. But we did get an intriguing little setup here, a little spy mystery. This person who's registered as dead probably didn't die and is probably in Germany. That was our box one. And it says, history, real paper, diary, 1943. One issue, interesting characters. Jonathan says, one issue I think might exist with setting up the mystery of what happened to Lizzie is I don't think anyone in the chat really thought Lizzie would turn out to be a German or Russian spy. And it seems like the designer thought we should. I don't know if the designer thought we should. I've had a really hard time getting on the same wavelength as the designer of this. I'm not sure, but I would agree with you that it would be more of an interesting mystery if we did really consider that she might be a spy. But maybe we can circle back to this. Part of the problem was throughout this entire game, we were told, here's the list of 12 people, and then they start getting crossed off. There's no hint that that list of 12 potential spies is unreliable, or when they cross off the list, is that reliable? So we didn't know. Should we be taking for granted that it can't be someone off the list? The rules of this system were not communicated well to us. And I think that problem persisted throughout this experience. The rules were very poorly communicated. The rules of the game, the rules that the designer expects us to understand that frame how we interact with the game were not explained well. Harry says, the Cozy Killer website implies there's no definitive solution. The reader should infer one of their own, one that satisfies them. I guess. I mean, I did go back and check Cozy Killer, and this is called a mystery detective game. It is phrased as a game, and I think we all kind of agree it's not really a game. It's really more of a story that we're just riding along. All right, let's look at our box 2. Box 2 continue this thing where they're doing an investigation, we're just following along. At this point, we started to worry, like, what is our job? Are we going to be pulled in to do something, or are they just letting us know? Now, box 2 had a couple things in it. First of all, it had a ticket puzzle with these little tickets that I've blown up that we didn't solve until 5 boxes later, and then they said 8, which seemed like it was to help us do a puzzle that we got right away. This was bizarrely difficult. We've talked at length about why this puzzle seemed to not make much sense. This was another frustrating case where it seems like it could have been arranged lots of different ways. We were close to it for a long time, and in the end, it had zero payoff. We spent a good chunk of box 2 solving this crossword puzzle. And we had to do that because we had a grill that used it. Now, this was actually an interesting moment that I think it pays to spend a little bit of time on. I think when we got to this crossword, combined with the first letter that had German, I think we got a little bit of a flavor that this is paced a little differently than some of the games we play. Because this is a subscription system that you would get a box each month. We had a lot of work combined on the chat helping with this, including using a little bit of ChatGPT. This is a hard crossword puzzle. We ended up solving good chunks of it. Then we figured out what what spaces we really need, and only work on those that helped with those. But this took real team effort. And if you were playing this solo, this is not something you would do in an hour. This is something you'd have to ask friends, go online. And I think there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with saying this is a game that you're not going to solve in an hour sitting down. Unless you're some super pro, there are lots of odd things. This is a real newspaper crossword puzzle. And these are some very esoteric clues and hints. And this took us some time. We did solve it with a large group, but I think that was kind of a nice feeling. Then I thought, okay, this is going to be a serious game. We are going to have to really work at these. These are not going to be easy. And these might require some real effort and thinking to solve them. This was also a puzzle that tied well into the narrative, because it does turn out that crossword puzzles were used by cryptographers, by Bletchley Park, to hire cryptographers. It was a nice throwback to real history. So I was feeling pretty good about the game at this point. And then we had the block puzzle, which I put away. That was okay. Not terrible. We were given some motive for why all the codes and messages. That was reasonable enough to avoid the censors. I was pretty happy about the game at that point. Box 3 is when it started to pick up pace in terms of the amount of content each box, but it's also where we started to have a couple puzzles that were unpleasant. It's also where we started to get a little bit overwhelmed. We got a lot of letters, which was very cool. And we could see how much of this game, story, mystery is going to be told in the form of letters between Penny and Lizzie, our main person. And very well done, very well written. Very personal, mostly just about her personal life. We also saw another design decision by the authors that I want to know your opinion about. And that was this design decision to just throw shotgun documents at us all throughout time. So each box we might get one letter from 1942, one from 1943, January, December, and then the next box would be again sprinkled in, so that in every box there were things from a wide spectrum of times that sort of interweaved. And that made it hard to keep track of things. As another complaint about the game and the website, nowhere is there a list of what document goes in what, how to reassemble it. There's a little list at the beginning of each one that says this has 5 letters, but it doesn't tell you which one. So because of that, I was keen not to mix things up, but that did cause a problem. So what did you guys think about the decision to jumble all the timelines up in each box? Dorian says, generating the timeline might be considered a gameplay element for deduction investigation. Yes, I agree. And it's just giving some more general lows of the game. Busy work, redundant, silly, infill puzzles. Yeah, Anna is talking about some bottom line comments. I mean, I agree with you, Dorian. I think, first of all, I think it can be an interesting storytelling mechanic. You know, that occasionally there are TV shows or movies where you tell a story out of order, and it's kind of fun to, in your mind, reassemble it and make sense of it. And it definitely makes sense that you could try to use that in a game, but I'm not sure one consistent theme throughout our gameplay is we kept paying attention to things and taking notes, thinking they would be important for us to figure out to solve the case, when it never was. None of our notes were important to do anything. None of the details, none of our notes, none of our long notes of names of people, dates, timelines. Look at this timeline we took. None of it was useful for us. None of it was used to rule out people, to alibi people, to make sense of people. None of it. Absolutely none of it was at all important. It might have been a little bit important for us following the story in the early period, but then it all get explained or was useless or non-important. Pedial says, I don't mind the mixing of timelines, though not putting the letters in chronological order in the boxes just feels like giving you busy work. Were the ciphers even relevant? I don't think that we really did hit a cipher that was relevant. Jonathan says, it did lead us to having some fun speculation near the start. It's true. There was like seeing how things ended did give us something to speculate. And in fact, I actually think there's one of the areas where the writers of the game did well and did something that most of these games don't do, is a little bit of foreshadowing and building up suspense and having us look forward to things. I think as a novice writer, you're sort of like, oh, I can't tell them what's going to happen in the next chapter because that'll ruin the surprise. Whereas a skilled writer knows you can sort of give them enough information that they're like dreading reading the next chapter because they fear for what's going to happen. And I think we are dealing with writers of a very high caliber. These letters and diaries were very well done. Now, as far as plotting and pacing and the other stuff, we have got lots of complaints, but the actual writing quality, like the quality if you were writing a novel, is very high here. Professor B, regarding the timeline, says, I did not like it because I was used to playing games that can be played in one sitting. All the information's in front of you from the beginning. And it says hopping back and forth could have been a good idea, but was overdone. And as Jesse said, it didn't really matter in the end. Jonathan says it made logical sense that with their setup for the story, that you would keep getting heaps of documents that weren't strictly in order. It's true, the setup for us getting these documents was reasonable. But some of it just felt like it was there just to scramble things up, like the renaming of all the operations. That was a little bit fun. But again, there was no reason for it because it never required us to know any of that to figure anything out. Professor B says, I would prefer that each box would be a full experience. You finish each box with the satisfaction of completing all the puzzles in that box. Well, that's an interesting point. I guess I feel a little bit differently. It was clear when we started playing this, and Stacy was telling us ahead of time based on her experience with a different Cozy Killer, that we shouldn't expect to use everything in one box in that puzzle. Some items you don't use till later. And I embraced that. I thought, okay, this is a different caliber of game, and that's going to challenge us. But it did cause problems, let's say that. Because occasionally there was a puzzle that could be solved, like the tickets, but we had to assume that maybe it's not meant to be solved in this box. And so because you always had to keep in mind, oh, this may get solved somewhere else down the line, you never knew how much time to spend on something. John says, this might be a side issue, but the three strands of the story never quite synergized to me. The mole hunt, the murder, and Lizzie's work at Latimer. Maybe hopping around so much with the documents contributed to it. Well, no, I think you're right, Jonathan. That's a larger problem that we'll come back to. Okay, let's go back to this box for a bit. So we got this wheel. Clearly in this game, this is, to my mind, where money should be spent. Like, I like that for the most part, they did not waste money on props, with some small exceptions, but instead spent their time on documents. To me, that feels the right thing. This was weird that there was no extra message in here, but fine. Okay, and then we got our first frustration. Our first real disconnect with the gamey nature and the cipher nature of the game. This is when the frustration first kicked in and we realized, this may not be so smooth sailing. And that was because in this box, the letters had a couple of codes that required a lot of busy work. And for example, here is the message. Here's one message. And in fact, it went on Here's another one, which is here, and then continues on to here. Now look at this. Okay. We actually had some fun moments here with some collaboration with the group about figuring out that this was Morse code related. And this was actually thematically pretty clever, that our protagonist figured out that she's talking to her friend. She can disguise information in code that looks like sewing instructions. Pretty clever. And it took us a while to figure that out and figure out how these codes were hiding information and that they were two different ones. And we figured out this one was Morse code. Now, after we figured out it was Morse code, we were like, that's cool. Then we had to actually translate this message. And actually translating this message from Morse code was not fun. Prone to error, especially with one person. If you're doing multiple people and you can read it a little better, but there's lots of extra filler in here you have to rule out. It took quite a while to put that into a computer website to translate the message for us. I don't know, how long did it take? Maybe an hour or two? When we finished translating the Morse code message, it said, what did it say? It said, must see you urgently, stop, need help with coded note. Cannot post, will get held up by censors. So after an hour and a half of decoding this message, we got something that was 99% useless. It did help us a tiny bit to solve this message, which was a little more enjoyable and had some actual detail. So this one I have no complaint about. I just do not understand why we were forced to spend so much time with so much busy work to get a pointless message. That was extremely unfun and felt like we're in a little bit of trouble because we're not on the same wavelength as this designer in terms of what we're willing to do. And then we got a note also in this box. So this was the box of the real cipher work. We got this Russian note. Now, this is an interesting puzzle, this cipher, this code. This was our most serious code to break. Now, why was it so serious? Well, it was really just the Caesar cipher. There were additional hints that came through over the course of boxes, but we kept notes on it. It took notes. But I guess the real complaint here was, okay, it's in Russian and it's Caesar ciphered. It looked like maybe it was going to have a big payoff. So that was going to be worth effort. So we did put in a lot of effort. The problem, I guess, here was that most of the work is sort of painful, error-prone technology work. Essentially, the Russian alphabet is 32 characters. If you were to try to hand write this, you can't give this to your Russian friend to translate. It's Russian letters, but it's not in Russian. So the only way to translate this is to essentially OCR it, put it in your scanner bed or your camera, translate each letter. You can't translate the text as normal, but translate each letter. Then put it into a Caesar cipher, and you're going to have trouble finding a Caesar cipher that will work with the Russian Cyrillic alphabet. So in our case, we had to find a Russian alphabet, get the letters right, shift it, then try to translate it, and then go through multiple cycles of OCR correction because the OCR is not perfect. Now, that's a lot of work that's not thinky work. It's sort of just going through this laborious process. Still, if this note was a real key to us figuring things out I think it would have been all worth it. And in fact, this was the one cipher that was actually from the spy. So in other words, this is actually the one that I was willing to forgive a lot for, and I did forgive a lot. I'm not really complaining about this. All the other ciphers we got were between our protagonist and her friend, and weren't hiding information from us. They were just meant to hide information from the censor, but it wasn't sensitive information. It wasn't going to break the case wide open because our protagonist knew about it because she encoded it. So it wasn't really compelling for us to figure it out. But this message from the spy, and especially set up with our protagonist saying, I can't read it, that was exciting. And that felt like it was worth the effort. And the decoded message provoked a lot of interesting discussion from us. We were actually fascinated by the puzzle it seemed to pose. And that puzzle was this. The spy is saying, found a dead person on the territory. I buried the body where no one will find it. This was actually the best moment in the case, because all of a sudden we said, whoa, we know something that our protagonist and other people at the time didn't know. And that is, not only is there a spy, but there's a murderer. And they're not the same person. And probably the people we're reading about thought they were the same person. That was the best moment of the case. We thought, this is it. This is where we are going to play a role. We know something they don't know. We can fix what they got wrong. And we're going to unravel this mystery. Who was the killer? Who was the spy? With two other bodies, we also have the question of, is the killer of all three? Or did the killer kill one and the spy kill the other? Did the spy kill one of the killers? Don't know. There's our mystery. Here's our game. We were focused on this like a laser for the rest of the game. Now, punchline, game doesn't care about that. None of the other clues helped us with any of that. And in fact, you could, I think, arguably say it's buggy with respect to that. Game doesn't care. Game doesn't solve it. Leaves that hanging, says it's not important. A terrible misstep, in my view. Terrible misstep that we'll come back to. John says, another thought on the disparate documents. You have to figure out how they relate to each other. I also think it makes a thematic sense for a spy story. I do agree with you with that. Pediol agrees. Too bad it ended up not meaning much. Anna says, yes, the Russian note was a good idea. It seemed like it could be key to the solution. Too bad it wasn't. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to come back to that once more before we get to the end, but let's take a look. Moving through, here's box 4. Here's where we started getting lots of documents. And then here's where we got our first taste of something that was a little weird. We got a message from Lizzie to Penny. And the message says, have ruled out Goosefelt. I'm not sure at this point we know who this was, but it's our protagonist telling her friend she's ruled someone out. Now, we've never heard of this person before. We don't know why she ruled him out, how she ruled him out, or what it means to rule him out, or whether we should trust her. None of it. Just that she's ruled him out. But that was the first of many such messages. Then we got some interesting messages about a tunnel that was intriguing, and we were starting to think there's going to be mystery involving the tunnel for us to figure out. A little bit of help solving the Russian cipher. Lots of documents about operations that aren't important to our story. Lots of documents about people on certain operations and teams that aren't important for us to understand anything really. A decoded Russian message about the V2 rockets. This was a fun moment because this is another element that was very true to real life. And we frequently had little asides where we were reading about something that was true in real life. The whole plan of the secret listeners was true. The V2 was true. The German dating sites were true. Then we got a new body, and we took this very seriously. Is this going to be the mystery we're supposed to try to solve? There was an interesting element where some of these had dates, some didn't. We had to try to guess the dates. We thought that was all going to be important for us figuring out alibis and who could have done it. So whenever we had an event, we were trying to track down its date, put it in its timeline so we could help rule people out. We could figure out. We're used to playing these games where we're like, okay, this happened in this date. This person wasn't there. That means we can rule them out. More stories of real people in history, more notes we took that weren't important. Somewhere around here, we start getting more people ruled out. All right, so lots of documents that are short like this. They felt reasonably right, but they weren't important. Okay, here we get this coded cipher. Again, Morse code. We got Morse code over and over and over again in this game. They got easier, we got better, but this wasn't unpleasant. But the message here, again, was from friend to friend, people we completely believed, ruling out someone else. Anton Ecker can be trusted. This is when we started to realize, wait a second, is this whole game going to be them telling us who they've ruled out? And these are people we've never met, don't know anything about, don't know why they're being ruled out. We're just passengers in the back listening to information about who's been ruled out. What are we supposed to be doing? We can't even help with that. We don't even know who these people are. We don't know why they're ruling them out. We don't even know if they could be making a mistake in ruling them out. Should we be considering that? We don't know. And then we got a couple things that are teases like this. Here's a message. Could our spy be a censor? Well, that was interesting. That got us thinking, how can we answer that question? How can we help solve that? Is that a possibility? What evidence should we be looking for? But we can't. It has nothing to do with us. This is not a tease. This is not something for us to make sense of. Nothing matters. Nothing about any of the hints, codes, messages helps us at all. There's nothing for us to do. There's nothing even for us to follow up on with that censor. It never comes up again. It never gets discussed. Lots of things in this game are like that. They get brought up. Gretchen's diaries got stolen. There's lights in the graveyard. Could the killer be a censor? They get brought up once, never again. Never addressed again, never resolved, never explained, and our protagonists don't talk about them ever again. Okay, so box 6, our arc of enjoyment of the game was like starting pretty good, then it went down with the bad ciphers and weird stuff. When we hit this diary, it went right back up to the top again, because here we got a big, serious amount of writing, of story, of narrative. Very well written. Very human story about this young girl and her working in this intelligence operation. Very little clues. There's almost no codes in here, just a little bit. It was just time when we could enjoy it. And we had a session where we just spent a couple hours reading it. Very enjoyable slice of life. Get a peek into this young lady's life. Very believable personality, interesting character, and her friends. With a little bit of help on some other codes. This was actually very well done and very well written and very appreciated. I think we needed this. This revived our interest in this game completely, at least speaking for myself. Then more people got ruled out. 2 more people got ruled out. A couple of them ruled out twice. I don't understand that. I don't know why what the point of that was. But the actual narrative, reading about her life, was compelling, and it made us care about her. And we took notes about, we started thinking, okay, this diary is talking about when Carl gets off work, when he's on break, other people. So all of these notes were taken, trying to get some timeline information, making notes of interesting dates. Maybe we're going to have to go back and figure out who was where. None of it was important. None of it we ever had to go back to. We would have been better off being told, just read this like a story. It's fun, enjoyable, like a book. Don't spend time trying to pay attention to any of the details. They're not important. But we did enjoy the diary. I think we all agreed the diary was very well done. Our next box, 7, did that thing I was talking about before, how as a skilled writer, they say, now the channel sort of guessed at this point, I think we're going to have another diary, because our first diary ended in 43. And sure enough, this letter says, hey, we've heard there may be another diary from 1944. We're working to obtain permission. To me, I think this is the skill of a good story writer. That they decided that it would be useful to hint to you that you're going to get another diary in the future. To me, that builds up suspense. We were anticipating that and looking forward to it. That's some real skill as a writer, to know better to give the anticipation than to make it be a total surprise. Very well done. Little insight into Churchill, little more touches with history. Throughout this whole entire thing, there's lots of real little history touches that are great. Okay, then we got another person ruled out, and it was clear to us now, okay, they're just going to do all this work for us. We don't know who any of these people are. They're just being ruled out. The only exception was that Carl, the boyfriend, was still on the list of suspects. Now, we found a little bit of flaws. We were saying, why isn't Lizzie panicking that her boyfriend is on the list? But we also were doing what we are trained to do. We were looking for signs of guilt, innocence, suspicion. And very early on, I was like, Carl left some candy on her desk. Was that because he was trying to sneak a look at her papers? And then we were trying to find, what does Carl have access to? Would he need to look at her papers? Anna was saying, I bet the chocolate was planted by the spy. Like, all of these details we were focusing on because we thought they might be important. None of them were ever important in any way. All of our time spent on that stuff was pointless. Transcripts with the generals, discussion of plans. It was fun to see how these plans were unfolding. Some fictional, some non-fictional. Fun to hear the generals talking. Fun to get little taste of history. This is a little thing about planting false information about where the V-1 rockets are landing. We all had enjoyable time talking about things that were sort of not fully explained, but when we looked at history in real life, got filled in a little better. Those were all great moments. Let me catch up with the chat a little bit. All right, talking about the diary here. I would have liked a few more things for us to do in the diary rather than pure story. I wouldn't have minded. I don't mind that it was pure story, but it was a little bit of our expectations being set. And it says, I guess the main problem is not a mystery game, really. Maybe an unusual interactive story experience or something like that. They should have advertised it differently. I think, yeah, I agree with you. One of the real problems here was expectations. Presenting this as a game when it's not. It was really an interactive story with letters and not something for the player to do anything with. Dorian says, it's more of a game if you're solving something to rule someone out as the mole, if you think about it that way. But in the end, yeah. Jonathan says, one pacing issue with the game and the first diary, though, is I think there had been enough setup for the mystery and spy hunt that I spent time in the diary waiting for the mole hunt and the murders to come up more in the diary. Well, This is actually a good point. Petiole, Jonathan is saying, waiting for there to be more suspense, mystery, and paranoia in the diary. I think Jonathan raises a really good point. So I've been saying how compelling the diary was as a narrative. But especially in the second diary, it was sort of shocking that we thought that she's on this task force to find the mole and the spy, and she doesn't really care about it. She doesn't seem to really care. The letters mention ruling people out, and we thought when we get the diary, we're going to hear about behind the scenes, this hunt and paranoia and fear that they've got a mole and a killer. 3 dead bodies on the base. Shouldn't they be walking around constantly afraid of this murderer? They don't seem to care. They don't seem to be interested. We're interested because that seems to us like the mystery. They don't seem to care. The diary, the second diary, which we're going to get to, starts off talking about the mole. A third of the way through, it never gets mentioned again. That was really strange. That was like bizarrely strange that for the last 2/3 of the second diary, it never mentioned the mole, the spy, the killer again. Very weird. Confusing. Very confusing. Perry says the deep dive into history was fun. I completely agree with that. DJ Moneycut agrees the history was the strong point, but the strong emphasis on history may have taken focus away from the other elements. I don't think it took focus away. I think we were just looking for a mystery in addition. Okay, box 8, what did we get? We got a little incident that was fun to hear about and piece together. This is one of these places where presenting documents out of time was actually kind of fun. Because here we hear this incident where Lizzie's getting removed, and we were like, what is it? What happened? And we tried to guess and figure out, and then eventually it did get revealed. And then they come up with this plan to impregnate the women and send them back to Germany. And then we got our second full newspaper, which we read a bunch of just for flavor. At this point, we knew the newspaper is nothing. It's not holding any clues. It's not important for anything. It's just flavor. And then we got a list of suspects finally, which was exciting, except that we're not involved in this at all. But we did see Carl's name on it. Okay, so I want to talk about the newspaper, and I want to talk about the operation to give babies to the generals and send them home. Let me start with the newspaper first, actually, and then talk about this. This was this was a couple highlights, actually. This box was a big highlight. First of all, I don't know if this is credit to the game designers or the history, but this is a real newspaper about D-Day. This really choked me up. I had a hard time reading these articles without breaking down. These people going to their death, the freedom fighters being told to hold their fire, be ready to take back their country. This was really emotional stuff. And I was very affected by it. Any game that can do that can bring you into this history, have you reading a real paper from 1944, 1945, and have you really feel the emotion of the fear and the stakes. I mean, that's worth something serious. And I was very moved by it, and I really loved that the game was able to do that. And you can't just give someone a paper and have that work. That works because we're fully in this world, fully. By this box, I felt like we were back in World War II times, and the stakes were high, and this was important for us to get solved. So that really worked. The other element of this box that was so fascinating and continued for the next few boxes was the extent to which the group started cleaving in our take on the morality of this operation that they were doing, and in our take about whether the reactions of the players were realistic. So when we started reading this thing about Lizzie has come up with this idea to set up a prostitute house to get the Germans talking, and then they've come up with this idea to make the German generals fathers and send them with the babies, half the channel was like, this is disgusting, I don't like this, Lizzie would never do this. And half the channel was like, well, this is something that they did in war. This was life or death. And this started some very interesting moral discussions in the chat about who would do this. Is this good? Is this bad? Is it realistic to think she would do this? And that was all enjoyable. There was no mystery we were solving, but that was all enjoyable discussion, and it continued for quite a while. Pediel says, strong agreement this is an interactive story experience, though it still leaves me frustrated with the ending and dropped plot hooks. Professor B says, I remember you reading this to us was one of the highlights of the experience. Again, not a game element, though. Just like you said, it worked because the story was compelling and immersive. Okay, let me speed up the pace a little bit. We got this box full of more letters and more secret messages, but they were all just filling us a little bit in on Penny and Lizzie, and 2 more notes saying I've ruled someone out. So we got more people ruled out, a nice little drawing of a dog. People thought there might be a secret message, but there wasn't. It was just a drawing of a dog. And we hear about Lizzie's fallout. I forget if this is the letter where we start to hear about Lizzie being pregnant. But there's a very well... like the letters between friends and the emotion of Lizzie, who's gotten pregnant with Carl, had her first sexual experience, was really written well and subtly and with an ear toward the place and the time and the person. I found it very compelling writing, very believable, very human, and we got a box that said this box contains heartbreak, and Carl died, her mother died. It was emotional. I mean, you felt it. It really took its time developing these characters. And it was sort of nice to get that in a letter form, and then we got it in the diary, where we got our second diary. Again, a fully packed diary, full of writing. I mean, the amount of effort that went into this. And someone pointed out how hard and rare that is to do, to write a diary that sounds like a diary and doesn't sound like planted clues. And this told us basically the end of the story of Lizzie. But it also walked us through the death of Carl and then the second romance with a German general. And we got a hint of that in one of the documents. We could sort of tell this German general Habich didn't want to go see prostitutes. He was very religious. He befriended Carl, and we could sort of see what was coming. There might be a little bit of connection with Lizzie. And eventually, over the course of 1944, this diary, she's heartbroken of losing Carl, and she eventually connects with Habich. She sleeps with him a couple weeks after Carl is dead before the funeral, and then can't even look at him. She's so ashamed. This was another real highlight of the experience, because at that point we had another cleavage in the channel. Half the channel was saying, or more than half was saying, this is sick. Habich is a manipulator. This is unrealistic. Lizzie would never sleep with him. And the other part of the channel, including me, felt like it was a very human story. This is a very young girl who's never been in love, never had sex, is thrust into a world where life and death, you could say goodbye to your loved one and never see them again. Trauma, all that stuff. And it was a very human reaction to me. She was completely devastated by Carl, completely worked up. She's got this baby. The father's dead. Looking for comfort, for connection, and she doesn't ever really allow the connection to fully form. She wonders if she could ever love him. She knows he loves her. She's looking for some support. It felt very real to me, very adult, very well written and believable, but the other half of the channel didn't believe it. Jonathan says, I will say I do think one of the boxes had some melodramatic pacing. She fought with Carl, then got engaged. Carl got hurt. He got better. She got pregnant. Then he died. Then her mother died. I think too many of those big events were presented in letters right after each other. Anna said, yeah, there were funny moments in the story, sad moments I appreciated. There was humor in these diaries. Remember, her mother told her the 3 rules. Anna, remind us what the 3 rules were. And she said, I broke 2 of them. The only place I'm going to disagree with Jonathan about this melodrama is because of the setting. If you just told me, here's a story about someone in 2020, and this is what happens to them in a couple months span, they have a fight, they break up, they sleep together for the first time, then the husband dies, then she sleeps with the other one, then the mother dies. If it was in normal setting, I might agree with you, but this is World War II. There's people dying constantly all over the place, and they're all feeling like this could be their last month on Earth. Everything's rationed. They're working to the bone, getting no free time. The press, the stress level everyone is under. They're all in close quarters, like on a college campus. They're all living in bunks, in dorms. To me, that excused some of the impulsive behavior and some of the melodrama. Perry agrees with me. I think all the human actions in this were quite realistic. Related to that, there was some real debate in the channel about... So let me put it this way. This is addressing what Anna is saying here about tell the story as romance. And I think, let's see, John says, I don't think saying Haybitch is being manipulative is saying the story is not realistic. I think it could be realistic that someone winds up in bed. Okay, yes, okay. So now we're moving to the second part of the really interesting discussions we had, which revolved around this relationship with Haybitch and the nature of Haybitch. Because some in the channel were saying, I don't like this guy Haybitch. He's a bad guy. He's a German general. He's taking advantage of Lizzie's rebound weakness. And others of us felt much more sympathetic towards Haybitch. And then somewhere orthogonal to that was the question, what is the writer trying to tell us a story about? And it seems like the majority opinion in the chat was that the writer is trying to present this as a romantic connection, a romance story, a sort of happy romance story with Lizzie and Haybitch. And you may be right. I felt a little more ambiguous about it. Like, to me, it was more of like a neutral slice of life. Like, I could see how they could get together. I could see how she could eventually come to love him. I could see that he would love her and is looking out for her. Remember, he brought her the dog. I mean, it built up this story. He slept on the floor. He didn't want to sleep in the bed till she welcomes him to the bed. It felt to me like Haybitch was being painted as a good person. which I guess leads credence to the idea that the author was trying to present this as a romance story. But I guess I viewed it from a different lens. I really viewed this as more like a slice of life wartime story where you're looking for love and companionship and sanity and comfort. And that means you don't judge that things are not so black and white in terms of, is this guy taking advantage of her and manipulating her? It felt much more like two people sort of reaching out, trying to feel their way around this world that makes no sense to them, and looking for love, and both just being real people with real, like, he loved her. He loved her right from the start. And he couldn't replace Carl. He was just trying to be there. And sometimes it's the story of if you can't be with the one you love the one you're with. That's an adult morality tale that I feel like we were looking at here. And you grow to love someone. So that, to me, felt very real, very interesting, and very well told story. And again, this really benefited from being able to take its time with these long diaries to really paint out a full picture of that relationship. Petula says, I read it the same way as you, Jesse. A gentle ending for Lizzie after all her difficulties, but not necessarily a happy ending. Anna says, Habich wasn't a bad guy, just their relationship wasn't real love. Lizzie, pregnant, grieving widow, was pushed into something by her superiors. It was painted as some great war romance. So, yeah, just the last point on this. I do think that Anna, particularly, and maybe Jonathan a little bit, their main objection was feeling like the writer was trying to tell them that this is a great romance. So it's not that you didn't think it was sort of realistic, but you didn't like a writer presenting this as a great romance. Whereas I did not commit to a conclusion that the writer was trying to present this as a great romance. It's possible that it was being presented that way. There's certainly sweet elements to their relationship, but I took it more as being presented like, here's a story without judgment being passed on Lizzie or Habich. Now, one problem I really had there is I don't understand. A real problem I had with accepting this story and buying into all of it, though, that I haven't talked about is Carl's death. Box 1 already tells us that they've faked Lizzie's death. We know the government has faked Lizzie's death as part of an operation. We figured that early. So then it became very plausible that Carl, who was killed off scene, his death was faked. And in fact, we worried he might be the spy. The game told us he could be the spy for most of the game. So I had a little bit of trouble emotionally dealing with Carl's death and appreciating it because I wasn't sure it was real. And part of the confusing philosophy of design issue, maybe the chat can help me with this with some theories. I don't understand the philosophy of not making it clear to us that Carl was dead. That seemed to me at the time very easy to do. Carl's killed off scene, and then she goes to his funeral, or she goes to the wake, whatever. And in my mind, not just in my mind, I was explicitly saying, the game must not want us to know whether he's dead or not, or must want us to think he's still alive. Because otherwise, you could solve that so easily. You just say how she saw the body. If Lizzie sees the body, then we know he's really dead, and then I can embrace the full set of emotions that are happening. I don't understand from a philosophy of storytelling why you would want to leave your reader believing that this person is alive. It feels like you've sucked a huge amount of emotional energy out of the story when you do that. Let's see if the chat has any theory about that. Anna says, come on, our last secret message was about the birth of their child. Storyteller wasn't neutral. Interesting. John says, well, maybe there wasn't a lot of body left if he was killed in a rocket blast. Well, that's sort of got the cart before the horse. If you wanted to have him dead and have the players and readers know about he was dead, you could have the body. DJ Moneycut says, kind of weird that they gave Lizzie the same fake death as Carl's real death. Yeah, well, there you go. There you go. Jonathan says, I don't think it was their intention to make it ambiguous. Well, I mean, DJ Moneycut's statement seems to argue against that. It does seem like, to me, it was a deliberate effort to make it ambiguous, but I'm not sure. And I don't understand the point. If you wanted to make it like more of a game where at the end you have to figure out you have to decide, was Carl really a spy? Then maybe you need to make it ambiguous, but it was just a miss from my standpoint. So finally, this whole culmination, and we've been getting these cogs to build this decryption machine here. We're finally up to box 12. At this point, we know at the end of box 11, she's headed off to Germany with Haybitch. At this point, walking into the 12th box, there was some frustration with the nature of this. What is up to us? Are we going to, in the end, get a question? Are we going to have to figure something out? At some point in the diary from 1944, I had a moment where I stopped everything and told the chat we had just read the most important clue of the whole game. I thought I had discovered the key to this entire game that was going to make it all worthwhile. Remember? And that was because it was Lizzie telling Penny, we've ruled someone out from being the spy because they weren't on base during the first murder. And I said, everyone stop. This is the clue of this entire game. Finally, all of our discussions trying to understand the order of the bodies being killed, who found what, when, the decoding of the Russian message, it's suddenly, finally in play. Because they think the spy and the murderer are the same person, and that's why they've ruled this person out who wasn't on base during the murder. But we know that it still could be the spy, that they shouldn't have ruled that person out because the spy and the murderer are not the same person. We know that they don't. I thought, jackpot, this is it. This is the payoff. Then we went looking for where is the letter of the name the person they ruled out. No such letter. It didn't exist. Then we realized, well, there's a little bit of confusion about which body. Did they mean the first body found, or is it just first body in this list? Bottom line is pointless. Nothing. And it had no significance. It wasn't important. Arguably, it's a bug about talking about the murderer being the first body. Either way, very confusing, misleading, completely unimportant. And then the chat found two contradictory statements in the diary about the number of people on the suspect list going from 12 to 7 to 9. Those feel like straight out bugs. And then after a third of the way, never mention the spy or mole again. Bizarre. Then we got to the final box. We were confused by what the game wanted us, how it could possibly wrap this up. What is it going to say? We had a debate. We were thinking, is it going to be that Lizzie's the spy? Is Carl going to be the spy and still alive? And all of this effort, this whole game, putting these pieces together, we were now going to be able to decrypt this final message that required this intricate decryption. What was this final message going to say? Was it going to finally reveal a twist? Carl's still alive, he's the spy. Lizzie's in Germany, she's the spy. Lizzie's figured out the name of the spy, and she's sending it in the secret message. It's all come down to decoding this message. The final box came. It actually had another message. We had two messages. It was a thin box. The moment here we got this letter of explanation about the spy. And it said, oh yeah, we figured out the spy is this one name. We had narrowed it down to two names, so all people we didn't know. If we had seen the postcard grill, we would have narrowed it down to this name as well. It didn't matter. Günther Fischer was responsible. Never encountered that person. They were never talked about. We never met them. We don't know anything about them. Doesn't matter. And then oddly, they say that there's some confusion, very confusing thing about first, second, third body, but they basically say, we've decided that the spy killed two of the people, and that some other murderer killed the other one. Don't worry about it. Not important. You don't need to know who that murderer is. We don't know. We don't care. Why did the spy kill these other two people? We don't really know. Why did the murderer kill the other person? We don't know. And we don't care. We don't care that it's not them. But we cared as players. We thought that was our whole task. This was shockingly bizarre feeling to read this. Just like, wow, took all the wind out of our sail, confirmed our worst fears about this game. Not only wasn't it a game, but it didn't care about the one thing we cared about and we thought we were being tasked to solve. Didn't resolve it, didn't care to resolve it. There is no answer. No one cares. Crazy. And then we're told, remember, this whole game is about Lizzie. And we've been reading Lizzie's diary, talking to Lizzie. And here it is. She's in Germany. And when we decode these messages, which we had a horrible time decoding, you can watch that stream. It was a 4-hour stream of pain because there were so many different points of failure. This physical device, it was not clear how to arrange the order of these things. There's so much slop in the system that you could go, any decode or encode was plus or minus 2 letters. The instructions for how to put it together were given in a letter from Penny to Lizzie that should be very clear. There's no reason that they're weird. It's not like this is a found device. She's like, here are the instructions how to use this. Once set, you decode window 1.5. You code window 1.5 and decode window 5.1. Didn't make grammatical English sense. Totally didn't make sense. Totally unclear what to do. And in fact, completely misleading. The actual procedure was nothing like this. We did eventually figure it out thanks to the channel. Each time we had to disassemble this when we weren't sure the order of these things, trial and error. And then at the end of those 4 hours, when we finally got it worked out, the messages were first of all, they weren't from Lizzie. This one was from Ursula telling us that Lizzie had another baby. We didn't hear from Lizzie. I forget what the other message was, but it was equally boring. It was arrived in Germany, made contact with Funnel or Gunnel, we don't know. So we got no wrap-up, no epilogue of Lizzie, no end to her story. Did she live? Did she die? Was she happy? Did she and Habich have a good relationship? From someone who is so good at storytelling in terms of the diaries and the letters, it was shockingly disappointing, discordant, unpleasant, unsatisfying, frustrating to go through all that effort and then not to get something from Lizzie, not to hear from Lizzie. I don't understand it. Who was the spy? Just some dude. Who killed the third body? No one knows. Doesn't matter. What became of Lizzie? She's somewhere in Germany talking to Funnel. John says, maybe you're right. We should figure that out. Was it just the birth of the child with its code name? I don't see how that's important, but I can give you the answer to that. It's right here. I think we talked about this on the stream at the time. It's here. Here's your answer. This is 1947. So remember, she's pregnant in 44 with the first baby. So this is a second baby. Right? We're not even hearing from Lizzie herself. So it was a terrible end that sort of reinforced all the worst parts of the experience and made us forget about all the good parts. It's hard not to be affected. There's I think it's Robert Spolsky who talks about how, for whatever reasons, humans are very affected by beginnings and ends. You tend to forget what happens in the middle. So your opinion of a movie is very influenced by how it begins and how it ends. And we have to resist putting too negative a spin on this game because of the ending. I do think it was a very poor decisions were made about ending this game. There were some real highlights in it, and I do think so we've talked about the parts we really loved, really liked, and I really do think a lot of this was great. If you were to give some constructive criticism and sort of sum it up to the authors for their next game, their next box, or how to think about what could be done better, what would you say? John says, the reason we're asking about the second child was trying to decide how positive the ending was supposed to be. Does having a second child indicate she's in a good place? Yeah, I guess it does. I mean, I guess it suggests that she's settling in and making a new life for herself and likes Hey Bitch enough to have a baby with him. So I guess that is a bit of an ending. Perry says, as a suggestion, as a constructive criticism, solve the mysteries you present. If you present a mystery and make it look like the player should solve it, it should be solved. Dorian says, if there were 3 to 4 fewer boxes with the same amount of content, then the cadence focus shift may not have been as jarring. It did feel like we got some thin boxes here. It may pay to talk a little bit about price, although that's trickier for me. Petiel says, I really think clearer goals for the player and reader. Signposts much, much more. Give the players some purpose. My DJ Moneycut says, my advice would be start with the end in mind. Have a good ending and work towards it. Also lower price. I do think Petiel's comment relates to expectations, which I think are a big one. To describe this as a detective mystery game, I think does you disservice. This is not a satisfying game. This is not a game. This is not even really a puzzle thing. It is a story told through letters and diaries with some ciphers, some of which are clever, some of which are very unpleasant, unfun, frustrating. And I think if your goal is to tell a narrative story, then maybe make that process of enjoying the story more streamlined. Present it as a story. Don't present it as a mystery. Don't sell it as a mystery game. Sell it as a story told through letters and diaries. And then the other part of it is don't, wrap it up in a way that makes the story wrap up interestingly. Give us an interesting story of what happened with the killer and the spy. Let us meet the spy during the course of the story so we care. And if our protagonist we've cared about through this whole thing, give us an epilogue ending that is satisfying, emotionally satisfying for the protagonist. I don't care if she's divorces, gets married, has a kid, but give us something from her. Professor B says, I'd say they have to decide whether to make the game a game in which the players are participants or an interactive story in which the players are just part of the audience. I agree. Anna says, my advice, write a better ending, advertise it as an immersive interactive story experience. Leave out the puzzles. It's not your strong suit. I do think I want to emphasize what Anna's saying there. I don't know if I'd come down that strongly, but I would say this. This is really heavy on the codes and ciphers to the absence of all other kinds of puzzles. I mean, we've played lots of games that use some logic, some constraint satisfaction. This is just all codes and ciphers, which I think is okay, but one of the problems we had was with pacing and flow, and that's because we occasionally hit a message like the tickets that took us hours and hours and hours banging our heads, or like that postcard grill that we never did solve at the end. And that takes away from the enjoyment of a interactive story. So I guess I would say, building on what Anna said, is if this is to be an interactive story, then the puzzles should not hang up the player for days. And the puzzles should not require 2 hours of manual typing in Morse code. That's a disconnect between the experience you're trying to curate and the flow of the player. You kick the player straight out of the story flow into brute force struggling and translating Russian, getting the Russian dictionary, the letters, like that breaks the experience. And if it's a puzzle game, then that's okay. But if it's a story that we're supposed to be reading along like a boat on the waves, you can't come to a screeching halt for 5 hours of pain to solve a message that's not important for the story. Jonathan says, I wish for it being a spy story where there had been some more paranoia in the plot itself. Felt like we sort of brought all of the suspense and paranoia ourselves. I think Jonathan's point is right, too. If 3 people are dead on the base, there should be a lot of paranoia going on in that diary and in discussions about who is the killer. And the first letters were between them back and forth. I think there's a killer. I think there's a spy. Then she didn't care about that much, and no one seemed to care about it too much. Professor B says, what you just said should be part of your review of the game video. That really summarizes it well. Okay, I'm not sure what part, but okay. John says, well, doesn't the story just ending at the end of the war fit with it just being a realist history story following one character during the war? I don't mind it ending with Elizabeth in Germany, but there has to be a message from Lizzie. When there's a little bit dealing with the expectations here. When we got to the diary, she was talking about photos. She said, I've given Carl's mother the last photo I had of him, and he took a photo of me, etc. And I said out loud, we're going to get photos of them. It's clearly setting us up for the emotional impact, the emotional valence of getting pictures. We've got a diary. There are things inserted in the diary. Some of them are going to be pictures to connect us with this story. And instead, we got a playing card with Morse code. And when we got the final box, I was like, there are going to be photos in this final box. Why? Because that's the strong point of this experience, is the emotional connection to this protagonist. You've drawn out this, you've written this very real person. And I could not believe that at the end we didn't get like a letter from her saying, I'm writing to you now, 1949, I'm in Germany. Here's how my life is going. I have 2 kids now. This is what they're like. Hey Bitch and I are getting along better. I'm come to this understanding of the world. I've come to understand Carl in this way. The death of Carl, I've framed it all like to not reconnect with Lizzie. I do not understand at all. From a story writing perspective, it boggles my mind. It feels like a complete emotional miss from someone who's demonstrated real skill at telling stories. Or at least, but maybe that's the problem. Maybe the skill here is in writing dialogue and letters and stuff moment by moment, but the overall storytelling is problematic. Petiel says it's Chekhov's gun. If you give us plot hooks, tie up most of them at the end and be intentional about any you're choosing not to tie up. I like that. That's a nice way of saying it. Jonathan says, if we're saying it should be moral, gray, and human, why should it have a neat ending? I just want to make my point again. It doesn't have to have a neat ending. It can be a gray human ending. It can be that she's not sure if she's in love. It could be divorce. It can be anything. But you have to hear from her. You can't have your final box be the first time we haven't heard from the protagonist. Think about that. Every other box is filled with letters, real letters telling us about her life, her feelings, her thoughts. Our final box, we don't hear from her. That makes no sense. That's not how you wrap up a story, which is essentially all about one character. This is a story about Lizzie Phillips. From moment 1, letter 1, introduction, your relatives of Lizzie Phillips, this is about her. To have the last box basically not be about her, that makes no sense. DJ Moneycat says, I think we have to compare it to other games in the genre. It doesn't compare well. There are too many other better options to spend our limited time and money on. Petiel says, yes, no emotional payoff. Anna says, yeah, the game was setting up lots of things that never delivered. That was its main problem. I think that's another more general way to say it. Lots of stuff got set up in this game that never paid off. It's almost as if they realized, oh, we have to end it now. We're not ready for it to end. Let's just wrap it up. Perry agrees. You could have a neat ending, a dark ending, whatever you want. It just has to be a real ending. Okay, so I think we're almost done here. An hour and 40 minutes we've been talking. I do want to talk a little bit about this issue of cost because I'm struggling with it a little bit. I'm struggling with how to talk about it. When I bought this game, I believe I paid under $400 for it, 300 and something, maybe with shipping. They're now listing it for $490 on the website. When we scheduled it, I mentioned regularly, every time I talked about we're playing this super long, super elaborate, biggest mystery game we've played, and most expensive. And I would say that constantly because that's how I think of it. That's just a huge amount of money. That's an insane amount of money, $500. Not only that, but we've played some expensive games, over $100 games, and often what you see in those games are expensive props of some sort. Here, there really weren't very many expensive props. Mostly documents, which suits me fine. I want all the money being spent into making good documents, not props. But I did talk about the expense and is it worth it? And it's hard not to ask the question, is it worth it? I think, however, having said that, you know that I've been working on a detective mystery game set in New York City, and decisions are coming up about materials for it, like big giant books of 200 pages, and the idea that, well, you could never sell this for a profit. No one would pay as much as it would cost to produce it, which is fine. The solution to that is not to try to sell it. But what it got me thinking is, it's odd to talk about, it's odd to think about things in terms of what's the cost per hour, which is really what you're saying. I mean, if we played 40 hours and you paid $400, right? That's $10 an hour. That's not that far off from other games that we play. And it is odd as a general conception. I mean, we all expect to pay the same amount to go see a bad movie in a theater or a good movie in a theater. Maybe we should readjust that. Maybe if a director says, look, I spent 20 years writing and rewriting this script, that's got to be worth more to go see my amazing movie. Why should you pay the same for someone who wrote the script with ChatGPT and filmed it in a week as you pay to see a movie? So there's some weird things going on. But here's, I guess, what I have to say. It's hard for me to, I did spend my own money, so I can ask myself, brain, how do you feel about where that $400 went? And I think what I would say is this. It seems impossible for me to argue that if you have limited resources and limited number of games you can play, that this would be a good place to put your money and time over another game. If you're asking me, should we play 20 boxes of CosyKiller's? Should I take my $400, $500 if you pay the list price on the website, and buy, all the Sherlock Holmes boxes, all the CosyKiller's, all the adventures? You could probably buy them all for $400. And you would get 10 times the hours of enjoyment, 10 times the gamey strategy, aha moments, wonderful deductions. So if you compare this to those other experiences and you just ask me, where should I put my money? I couldn't recommend this. Couldn't. But on the other hand, if you then say, well, the alternative is that something like this never exists, that's not what I want either. What I would say is this is a very boutique, very niche experience for a very specific, tiny sliver of people. And that there's nothing wrong with that. People who really love history, who really love this setting, this storyline, this kind of writing, an interactive story, maybe who love ciphers. It's not just that it's good this exists and this may hit them. This is a different experience, a longer experience. But I guess the second part of what I'm saying is that maybe once you say that this company is making such a niche boutique product, that of course it's not proportionally priced as the other games, and you shouldn't expect it to be. If the company knows we're making a game that most people will not be able to play, won't like, and it's not for them, it's not a mass market game. It's not even a mystery game player's game. It's such a small niche that it has to be hand packaged, hand packed. It's not, then we almost have to say cost shouldn't be the issue anymore. This is only for people who have a lot of money and want this unique experience. It's just like you go on some luxury restaurant. Most people don't want to go to that restaurant. Most people can't afford to go to that restaurant. And most people don't care about getting this 5-star service with the crazy painting the dessert on the table. So of course that's going to not compare well price-wise. It's for a different audience. So I guess that's sort of what I'm coming down on now, that maybe the price part should be very low in our consideration. Enough in our consideration that we wouldn't recommend anyone. You're not going to tell someone, save up your money, it's worth it. Or for hour of fun per dollar, it compares well. It doesn't. It compares terribly. You should not save up your money to buy this if you like the other mystery games and you have limited amount of money. This is only for a very niche audience. All right, let's look a little bit more, see if anyone has any final thoughts. Pedial says, yes, it's essentially a luxury product for interactive story lovers. Except the cipher parts throw a wrench in that, but yes. Anna says, I would say to designers, don't give up, just learn from your mistakes, do better next time, we'll play it. DJ Moneycut says, I don't think there is a niche audience who would enjoy that ending. Well, that's fair enough. That's fair enough. Now, this isn't their first game. They made Inheritance of Murder, which I've heard good things about. Lots of people like. So I don't know where to put that, but I would say that we're half the right audience for this. We are the right audience for a long epic game. I've recorded a video of our longest, most epic marathon detective games we've played. This at 40 hours would make that list if I were to remake it now. We are the right audience for that. We are the right audience for taking seriously a big, long game. We are the right audience for immersing ourselves into the history and the writing and the story. We are the right audience for being willing to sit for 3 hours and read through a diary and enjoy it. Unfortunately, we don't like the busy work and the frustration work of the ciphers and codes that are unnecessarily fragile and fiddly and also have no payoff. And we want the ending to be nailed. We want someone to land the ending. So yes, it needs to do better, but with some fixes, this could be worth $400 to someone like me, to us. Petio says, the issue with the story plotting are beside the point Jesse was making. I think even if the story was really successful, I think it would still be a very niche product. Yeah, that's true. That's absolutely true. Even if it nailed the ending and was a mystery, had a real mystery game elements, it would still be hard to recommend. And but maybe its audience is not price sensitive, right? There's certain goods that are not price sensitive. The people buying them don't care. You go look at these coffee people buying an $800 pour over machine that's worthless, or the focus on the aesthetics of some of these devices that are charging huge amounts because it's some upscale luxury market. So there's a whole class of items that are luxury items for people who aren't price conscious. And that's sort of where we are here. So maybe focusing on the price is not important. But I guess one message of the review is this is that. This is not for you if you're not in the market for an overpriced luxury item. It needs to be thought of that way. DJ Moneycut says, there's no entry for this game on BGG. How many people do you think have finished this? Not many. Not many. There is a Facebook group for this. You have to apply to get in. I applied yesterday after our stream and still haven't been admitted in. That's unfortunate. It's, as I've said when we started playing this, there are essentially no reviews. No full reviews for any of the Cozy Killer games. Inheritance of Murder is the most common one. Site Q, the one they just kickstarted, a couple people in the Discord have backed it and will play it, so we'll hear a little bit about it. I have a feeling that may get more plays, so maybe we'll hear a bit more about it. Jonathan says, I'll play a bit of devil advocate and say I think that in a sense the story was supposed to have ended in box 11. There is the final journal entry about facing the new year. We're supposed to have narrowed it down to one mole. I think box 12 is more supposed to be a small epilogue. That's why I said, Jonathan, you should read the diary last. Yeah, I mean, I don't think it worked as an epilogue. I think you have a good point. Box 11 was odd. It seemed to say this is the last, but then there was one more. I do think you're right. It did narrow it down to one mole, but I'll just remind you, like, it just told us, I've eliminated this person. I've eliminated this person. Like, we didn't know who these people were. We didn't know on what basis they were eliminated. So we weren't involved in any of that. And it was an epilogue that took us 4 hours to decode useless message. So it was failed as an epilogue. It almost feels like I feel like I've done quite a bit of critiquing of epilogues on this channel. I even critiqued Matt C's epilogue of the custom mystery game we played. And maybe not everyone agrees on my philosophy of epilogues, but I feel like I commonly have criticisms of an epilogue not emotionally working. Perry says, luxury items are usually of a high quality. There are too many weaknesses in this game to describe it as luxury. I mean, I think you've got a point there. I think, like, if you're going to be spending that much money, you do expect things to go smoother than this. You do expect that the players shouldn't be suffering so much. Now, it was remarkably free of typos, but I think we did see more serious errors in some of the logic of the diary entries and stuff. But yeah, I mean, I think you have a point there. I think you have a point. If you were trying to be a little more constructive in criticism and positive with all the negative things we've been saying, you could say this. There is no other game that has brought in real-life history of war, spy real-life history, than this game. And I don't think we've ever encountered a diary or a long set of records that has been so generously well done in terms of giving us a picture of a person through their letters and diaries, and a really compelling human adult story of this person. I mean, I think that all of that text from Lizzie was a fleshed out, living, breathing person that I felt was real enough that we were going to see a picture of her. And I don't think we've seen that done better in any game, and that's not easy to do, and a huge amount of work went into it, and it was done very well. And the real life tying into real life events, and just the context describing the scenes at Latimer House and the different workers and everything, and just the day-to-day stuff, and the humor and subtlety of the going to church, all that stuff, that's done as well here as in any game we've played. And the writer has a real skill for that. I just feel like they need to pair up with someone who's better at mysteries and puzzles and game. You combine this writing with some of the puzzle game stuff of some of these other games of leaving clues and having aha moments, and you've got something very special. I guess that's where I would leave my final comments. Let's see. I think the last box was meant to be the finale with assembling the machine. Petty said, I think that's true, except I would add that the element of uniqueness can substitute for quality in the world of the rich. Okay. John says, that's fair. Anna the Faux Enigma machine does seem like it's supposed to be a big moment. John says, if you pay for this month by month, isn't this about as expensive as Hunt a Killer? And would we say Hunt a Killer is luxury boutique? You're saying that a Hunt a Killer box at full price, a set, has 6 episodes and it might cost you $200? I think you're right. They're pretty close, although Hunt a Killer frequently goes on deep sales, and this one doesn't seem to. But I think you have a point. I think you have a point. Hunt a Killer is much more of a game, but there are some real commonalities, and I think you have a point. I will say one more thing about where this series fits in. When I purchased The Hidden Listeners, you can get it cheaper on eBay. They officially sell, the makers, CosyKiller's, selling it through eBay. I don't think they advertise that much cheaper than their full price. But, you know, they've got 5 series. They've got The Hidden Listener, Inheritance of Murder. They've got a Chinese treasure ship one that they're discontinuing for some reason. And they've got Hammurabi, not Hammurabi, but an Egyptian one. And then Marlborough House, which is Jack the Ripper. This one is described as for more expert level. And originally, I tried to buy the Marlborough House, thinking that we like the dark Jack the Ripper stuff. But when I contacted them, after I had ordered it, to follow up, I believe what I asked was, I said, like, we like story as well. We like difficulty, but we like story. And the salesperson said, well, Marlborough House is our least narrative story, has the least amount of story, something like that. But The Hidden Listener has a lot more. So that's why I bought The Hidden Listener. So if you're trying to decide which one to buy, someone in the Discord has bought all of them. I'm curious about Marlborough House. I'm curious about the other ones, and I'm curious about the new one. I think, though, that they are still writing Site Q. I think they've only made like 1 box or so. So maybe Joanne Smedley will take a deep breath, watch this discussion. It's not going to be easy to watch, but it may be that she finds some useful suggestions here. And I'm not ready to shell out another $500 for another one of these to take a roll of the dice. But if I hear from others that it fixes some of those problems, I wouldn't be against paying for another one. Another question came up is a theory of if we would have enjoyed this more if we played it once a month instead of playing it every other day or so. And I'm not sure. I think it's certainly possible. I'd like to know the answer to that question. I just, does anyone have any theories about that? Would we have enjoyed this more? The problem with doing things once a month is that you forget so much. At least I do. So it does help to have stuff fresh in your mind. But maybe if we had spread it out once a month, I mean, some of these boxes were pretty thin. We spent a total of 40 hours, but really that's 3 times longer than you would play if you played at home. And really, we did a lot of recapping in this game. I spent many hours just recapping. Jonathan says, Jesse, can you look at the original postcard from Bach 1? This seems to be written to Carl. I'm curious if it makes emotional sense as Lizzie is writing to his spirit while moving on. Don't forget, it was a fake postcard to Carl. That's the thing. You're saying it was a fake postcard because it was really a postcard not to Carl, but to Neely. But you're saying, might she be getting out some of her thoughts in that postcard? That's an interesting idea. Don't see it. Maybe did I move it into a different box? I'm afraid I don't have it here, Jonathan. I don't know where it is. This was the one that said, we had something special, but it's time to move on. That's interesting, Jonathan. You're saying, was she writing a letter emotionally saying goodbye to him? after he died. That's a very interesting point. I'm kind of curious now about that. Well, we may have to just discuss it in the Discord because it's not... It's not where it should be. Was there a reason why I moved it out of this? Did we? Oh, it's probably where we decoded it. It's in the box where we decoded it. All right, let's see if we can find it. I mean, let me just say I thank you all for joining me, for sticking with me for this thing, this discussion, and it has been useful to me. I'm not sure it's been useful to you or if it's been a chore, but I guess it doesn't matter. You stuck with me while we did it. Professor B says, I can only speak for myself, but I don't think I would have stuck with it if we had played only once a month. It would have been difficult to stay engaged during the downtime. Okay, well, here's the message that Jonathan wanted us to look at. Okay. So let's take a break and take a moment to look at this. This was a postcard from our first box, pretending to be from Carl, but it's really got a coded message to Neely. But Jonathan is saying, let's look at this as if it was Lizzie writing from the heart to Carl as a goodbye, since he's dead at this point, is what we think. Dear Carl, I know you are worried on my behalf, but everything is fine. Neely has it all planned out and worked out. I'm sure you remember her. Always the one to over-prepare. I'm surprised Latimer managed without her for the whole of October, but she is back now and has other plans for the department. Kendrick agrees with everything and final plans are in place, but I wish just once that I could have seen you again. Remember me fondly and try to let me go. What we had was special, but everything must end one day. I like your reading of it. I'm not sure that's the intention. I know you're worried on my behalf, but I do like your idea, Jonathan, that she's sending a coded message. So she's writing some of this just to fill her for the code. But she's also speaking from the heart to the ghost of Carl, basically. And do we know for sure that he's dead at this point? Let me just see. Know you're worried. Neely and I have left Latimer. We'll depart soon. So I guess, yeah, by the time, if we assume this was written about the same time as this, then Carl's dead by the time she writes this. I like your reading, Jonathan. I think I like it. I think that's a good note to end on. That's a pretty subtle, sweet way to look at it. Whether it's intended or not, probably was intended that way. Okay. Well, thank you for joining me. I appreciate it. I really appreciate this group. As much as I get frustrated, I wouldn't have it any other way to have this group to play with and to commiserate, to talk about. And the only reason these games are enjoyable now for me is because I get to share them with you and we play them together, talk about them together. I appreciate your willingness to talk and chew through them and listen to me talk. Even when it's a frustrating experience, I still had a good time. I wouldn't undo this last 40 hours if I had a choice. I did enjoy it. I did get something out of it. I think we learned some stuff. It was a trip, an interesting trip to make together. And I'll see you on the next trip.